Thank you, Bernard.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. You just mentioned the £20 a week increase in universal credit, and that's meant that lots of people have been able to buy food at a supermarket rather than going to a food bank. But now they're worrying about the proposed benefit cut in April. Isn't it unfair leaving it until March before they find out whether that cut is going ahead?
I think that all the just by the way, I don't want to rule out working with Darren on eradicating poverty. I didn't want to sound dismissive of your proposal. I'll study it. But on your point, Stephen, about UC, I take your point. I think that what we want to see is jobs. We want to see people in employment. We want to see the economy bouncing back. And I think most people in this country would rather see a focus on jobs and growth in wages than focusing on welfare. But clearly we have to keep all these things under review.
Even with that increase in universal credit, there has been a huge surge of food bank demand in the pandemic. Do you agree that we ought to be seeing that reversed?
Well, I think that people who help with food banks and set up food banks are doing a wonderful job, and yep. I thank them for it. And in an ideal world, we would be people would be able to have absolute confidence in getting what they need from their weekly shop, and that's why we're focusing so much on things like the living wage, increasing pay wherever we can, increases in pay for 1 million key workers this year, and doing everything that we can for the poorest and neediest. And don't forget that of the £280 billion that have been spent since the pandemic began on supporting the jobs and livelihoods, the benefit has gone overwhelmingly to the poorest and neediest groups.
Well, there are a lot of people still claiming the old-style benefits, Jobseekers allowance, employment and support allowance. Their circumstances are identical to people claiming universal credit. The legacy benefit rates were always the same as the UC rates, but they weren't increased by £20 a week. What justification is there for paying them £20 a week less?
Well, we want everybody to move on to universal credit. We think it's a successful system, and I note with some anxiety that it's still the stated policy of the Labour Party to abolish universal credit. I don't think that's the right way forward.
Well, if you take people, for example, with severe disability, they're not allowed to claim universal credit, and yet their benefit hasn't been uprated in line with universal credit. Surely it should be. And if the question about universal credit is resolved at the time of the budget, will the question of those legacy benefit rates be addressed as well at the same time?
We're committed to doing everything we can to address the needs of those on welfare. We believe strongly in universal credit. It's helping. It's putting more money into pockets of families across the country, particularly with the £1,000 increase. But the best thing is to get people into employment, and that's what we're working for.
Can I raise one final area? We spoke at the Liaison Committee in May about hard-working, law-abiding families with no recourse to public funds, and you made a point which I very much agreed with, and I quote, you said people who've worked hard for this country, who live and work here, should have support of one kind or another. I think that's absolutely right, but unfortunately that isn't the current policy. It's, in my area, it's one of the factors in the spread of the pandemic. People can't stop working because they can't claim social security, so they have to carry on working. Shouldn't this NRPF condition at least be suspended for the duration of the pandemic?
I totally understand the logic of your argument, but the problem is that it's a very, very long-standing provision in this country that NRPF conditions should not should apply for those, for instance, who are here illegally or unlawfully. And I think that it would be not the right way forward to change that. And what I think we also discussed, Stephen, was just because people have their NRPF, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible for support of many kinds and provided through local councils or otherwise.
No, but they're not able to claim universal credit, and that's what's forcing many people to carry on working. I mean, the current arrangements go back to 2012. We've seen the Education Department's been helpful, giving people access to free school meals. The Housing Department has accommodated rough sleepers with no recourse to public funds at public expense. But it's the Home Office still in a kind of Windrush mindset, which isn't picking up your point about people ought to get support.
Well, I think that's I don't agree with that. And just to go back to the point I was making earlier, NRPF people, I have massive sympathy for them, but they do have access to the coronavirus job protection scheme, to furlough, to funds that the local authorities can make available to help people in particular hardship. The £7.2 billion of funding we've made available to local authorities. So this country does not allow people to fall through the cracks, even if they are classified as NRPF. The point you make about UC is a valid one, but I think I've given what I hope are intelligible reasons for why we want to make a distinction between those who are eligible for UC and those who are NRPF.
Thank you, Stephen. We must move on. Caroline.